It's Friday, and we are working for Crusoe. Friday, November 15th, 2024. In Los Angeles, he is Sam Park. In Reno, where it is beginning to snow, Reno, Nevada, I am John Ramey. Howdy, Sam.
How's it going?
It's going great. We're bundled up as cold weather descends here in the biggest little city. We're talking about the Fed. We're talking about APEC, which, of course, is the Asia-Pacific Economic Cooperation Summit. Big Peruvian / Chinese news. And we're also going to talk about a snap election in Germany and the French budget. Can we call it controversial or just divisive? We'll get there.
Some of both, I would say.
Yeah. Let's start with our absolutely favorite topic here on Working for Crusoe, and that is monetary policy and the U.S. Central Bank. Remember, our dual mandate on Working for Crusoe is economics and foreign affairs. So, obviously, the U.S. Central Bank is an important deal. New York Times reporting, Jerome H. Powell, the chair of the Federal Reserve, said that a solid economy with low unemployment, robust consumer spending, and strengthening business investment gave the central bank room to take its time cutting interest rates. The chairman, quote, "The economy is not sending any signals that we need to be in a hurry to lower rates," end of quotation. He said this during a speech in Dallas yesterday, Thursday. Another quote, "The strength we are currently seeing in the economy gives us the ability to approach our decisions carefully," end of quotations. The Fed meets again in mid-December. There is an anticipated quarter-point rate cut, but that is not guaranteed. Do we have that right, Sam?
I would say so, yeah. That seems a fair summary of what's going on.
Your thoughts?
Well, I thought it was interesting just that he said that they need not be in a hurry to cut rates further. And I think that many people in the investment community were a little bit disappointed about that. The investment markets have not been reacting well to that news. And I thought it was especially interesting in light of his comments last week, which we did not discuss because we had many other things that we needed to discuss last week. When Jerome Powell held his press conference after his announcement of the quarter-point rate cut of last week, a reporter asked him if he would consider resigning if incoming President Trump asked him to, after, of course, becoming president. And Chairman Powell said, no. And that's all he said. And then the reporter followed up and asked him, well, is that because you don't consider it within the law for him to ask you to resign? And Powell said again, no, which really was just a restatement of his answer to the previous question and not at all an answer to the second question. And of course, Powell was appointed by Trump during Trump's first term and had a sometimes contentious relationship with him because inflation was actually beginning to pick up in 2019. And the Fed actually began to raise rates at that time. This is after, years of economic recovery. And so it's not at all unusual for the Fed to actually raise rates.
This was the end of quantitative easing, but well before the supply chain shocks and inflation from the pandemic.
Right. And so, and Donald Trump became very upset about this and began publicly berating the Fed in general and Chairman Powell in particular, even though he had appointed Powell because the previous chair, Janet Yellen, had been appointed by Obama. And so Trump wanted to have his own person in charge at the Federal Reserve. And so many people, perhaps including this reporter who asked the question, were expecting that Trump and Powell might again have contentious relationships. And now I have generally a pretty good opinion of Chairman Powell. He's made some mistakes, certainly, right? But
tough job.
Yeah, it's not an easy job. And but his refusal to consider resigning, and if Trump were to ask him to, I have a slightly better opinion of him this week because that's the way this is supposed to go. The Fed is supposed to be independent for a reason. If Trump
Explain
had
this. Why is an independent central bank so important? What would be the problem if a central bank of any economy, but certainly the biggest in the world, was super sensitive to political whim?
Well, ask people in Turkey, right? I mean, the Turkish central bank has many times bowed to the political wishes of the president Recep Tayyip Erdogan, and so they have been much too slow to raise interest rates to fight inflation, which is was at one point 75% or something ridiculous like this, right? It's caused terrible economic problems in Turkey, and so the general idea is that if central banks bow to pressure from elected political leaders or unelected political leaders, they will just keep interest rates low for much longer than they ought to, and inflation will become an enormous problem, much bigger than it has been here recently. So, and that's one of the reasons why I don't want to say why the Democrats lost the election, but when interest rates rise, it can be very difficult for consumers. Your credit card rates go up, your auto loan rates go up, mortgage rates go up, and people were afraid, as we will recall, that raising interest rates would spur a recession. Many people were very certain that a recession would happen as a result of rising interest rates. It didn't, but it was certainly a concern, and people were not unjustified in holding that concern at the time. It turned out, as we know, that the Federal Reserve did a very good job in navigating through all these circumstances, and a recession did not ensue. But that's the reason why we want the Fed to be independent, is because they feel like they don't have to take the political heat themselves, and they can just do what's best for the economy.
So we can safely say that an independent central bank is a pillar or a central tenet of American prosperity in the modern age.
Yes.
Okay. So everybody just note that. Any other thoughts on the Fed, or shall we move to the Asia Pacific Economic Cooperation Summit?
Just one brief thing is that one of the reasons I think that Chairman Powell held off on promising future rate cuts is because he doesn't know exactly what the economic policies of the incoming administration are going to be, or that is, he doesn't know to what extent they will be achieved. Right. For instance, as we've discussed, Trump says he wants to raise tariffs. That will have an inflationary impact, but we don't know which tariffs are going to be raised and by how much. And so that impact will depend on those factors. Trump has promised that he's going to deport lots of people. Also, that will have an inflationary impact, but we don't know how many people will end up being deported and what impact that will have. I saw Larry Summers, the previous government official and sometime university president. He was Treasury Secretary for a time in the Clinton administration, the noted economist. He said that if Trump's entire economic agenda is implemented, the inflationary impact will be worse than the impact of COVID-19 on the supply chains. Now, I was rather alarmed to hear that, but I had been wondering.
Summers could be wrong. Didn't Summers predict a recession recently?
I'm not certain. I'm not sure if
Sure.
he.
Listen, but the fact that he thinks it's in the realm of possibility is wild, and it also means that Powell needs to keep his powder dry because
Yes,
he might have to fight more inflation.
Exactly. And for me, I was wondering about that, right? Because I'm not an economist. I don't know, I knew that it would have an inflationary impact. But Summers also said, so I'm hoping that the Trump administration will moderate its policy so that the inflationary impact will be lessened. And I think that's probably actually pretty likely. Politicians promise things on the campaign trail all the time. Trump himself, running in 2016, said he was going to build the wall. He did build part of it. So I think we can imagine that he will deport some people. He will institute some tariffs. But again, we don't know how much. And so that's why the Federal Reserve is holding back on making more specific predictions about their own course in determining monetary policy.
All right. Well, we will keep an eye on the Trump administration 2.0's evolving economic goals and policies. All right,
Yeah.
to Lima, Peru. Dateline, Lima, Reuters reporting today. With Donald Trump's imminent return to the U.S. presidency looming over the Asia Pacific Economic Cooperation Summit, that is APEC, in Lima, Chinese President Xi Jinping said today that unilateralism and protectionism need to be rejected in favor of economic globalization. I am going to insert a funny Global Times cartoon about protectionism here. Global Times, of course, is the Chinese Communist Party's English language website, newspaper. Xi's critique of protection, this is back to Reuters. Xi's critique of protectionism at APEC offers a preview how China will seek to position itself once Trump takes office in January. Now, let's quote from the Global Times, Sam. China is ready to work with Peru to champion true multilateralism. This is the Global Times. Promote an equal and orderly multipolar world and a universally beneficial and inclusive economic globalization.
Well, that's great.
Yeah, according to Chinese President Xi Jinping, said in a signed article published yesterday in Peruvian media. The article titled China-Peru Friendship, this is so great, setting sail towards an even brighter future. The Global Times is many things, but at a loss for hyperbole, it is not.
Never.
Why is this a big deal? Is this China trying to find another west coast of the Americas hub for their products? I have to imagine they were trading with Peru before this. Like, what's so important about China and Peru getting aligned and opening up a port or whatever he did there?
Well, as you say, I mean, it is, sort of extending their trade relations into our hemisphere, right? And, we say.
But they're already importing to Los Angeles.
Sure. But, the more sort of friends they can have, the better, right? And that's true for any country. But they were opening up a very large port facility in Shanghai, and that is the Peruvian city of Shanghai, not Shanghai in China, which might be confusing phonetically. But so the APEC summit took place in Lima, but there was separately an official state visit to Peru by Xi Jinping. So it's not just that he was there at the APEC summit. But he was actually sort of expanding diplomatic relations with the nation of Peru. And why not?
Essentially doing a ribbon cutting on this giant new port.
Absolutely, right? And it's very large. It's an enormous facility. And so, it's absolutely fine, right? I mean, we should expect other nations to have relations with one another, right? We can't forbid these things or stand.
No, it's probably good, right?
Well, and on the whole, sure. For instance, I don't know who attended the APEC summit from the United States. I imagine somebody did, right? But I haven't heard anything about it.
Now, I didn't see any reporting about it.
No, of course, we've got a lot of other things that we're focusing on here in the United States right now, right? But the United States is part of the APEC grouping, right? So I would imagine somebody was there, but it's sort of as a placeholder.
Right. It's a lame duck person. What's a current administration official going to say at this thing?
Exactly. Right. And so this is sort of a problem that we've been having all year, especially since President Biden dropped out of the presidential race. Right. Is that it is sort of a lame duck administration and has been for a number of months already. And this has had an impact on a number of international relations issues, as we've seen, whether it's the Middle East or Ukraine, but it's across the board, essentially, right? Is that we don't know exactly how things are going to change, just that now that we know that they definitely will. And so, but why should China worry about that, right? Why should they waste their time just because we're wasting ours, right? They were going to go to Peru anyway, right? And so let's just move, in their minds, they should think, let's just move forward with what we were going to do anyway. We want to expand trade with the Americas, and so that's what we're going to
do. Did you see about Peru's accidental president? She kind of came out of seclusion to meet Xi. Did you see about this?
No, I didn't hear about
this. Okay, AP reporting. Big day for Peru's accidental president, Dina Boluarte. whose official schedule has been blank for months. On Thursday, the high-profile Asia-Pacific Economic Cooperation Summit in Lima thrust Boluarte among the world's least popular presidents with a mere 4% public approval rating into the bright lights of a convention center packed with world leaders, prominent CEOs, blah, blah, blah. It's not just that Boluarte, long a low-profile and low-paid civil servant, has never before rolled out the red carpet for powerful leaders like Joe Biden or President Xi Jinping since taking office in December of 22. It's that she has hardly been seen outside her brick mansion in weeks. Local journalists count more than 100 days since she last spoke to a reporter. So this was kind of a coming out party for President Dina Boluarte. So tip of the cap to her.
Wow, I wonder what's going on in Peru.
I thought you would like that. It was intriguing, right? The report goes on to say her recent seclusion or reclusion is not especially surprising. She became president because she was the vice president of Pedro Castillo, a former rural school teacher with no previous political experience, who was ousted when he tried to dissolve Congress and disband the courts. And then there was a wave of violent protests that rocked the country. And that was Boluarte's first few weeks in power. So there you go.
Wow. Well, that's
Peru, man. We have not done a lot of Peru on Working for Crusoe.
Well, there's always something. I mean, we're going to miss something. But the thing is, that's a big deal, right? I mean, for her, right? If that's the circumstance through which she came to office, and suddenly she's got to, welcome Xi Jinping and, this global delegation to Lima for the APEC summit, that's a lot on her plate for a rookie politician.
Yeah, you're on, kid.
Yeah, exactly. Good luck. We're all counting on you, Ms. Charles.
I mean, maybe she spent the 100 days away from, the media and public view practicing or getting ready. Anyway, yeah. I thought that was, I guess we might call that a game note or a kicker story.
It seems to be going well. That's good job, Dina.
Any other thoughts about APEC, or shall we pivot to Europe?
Let's go to Europe.
Okay. We'll start with Germany. Now, we've got a snap election, but we've also got a sports and social media story that ties into this, Sam. So I know you'll be very excited about that.
I am.
First of all, CNN is reporting Germany is set to hold a snap election on February 23rd after an agreement was reached among parties in Germany's fractured parliament earlier this week, Tuesday. Chancellor Olaf Scholz's Social Democratic Party, that is the SPD, said that the main parties had agreed on the date for the snap election. The official announcement was made by Rolf Mutzenich, the group leader of the SPD in Berlin. Mutzenich said Chancellor Scholz will officially announce a vote of confidence in the government on December 11th, followed by a vote 5 days later. Should the government fail to win the backing of the parliament, an outcome that is widely expected, German President Frank-Walter Steinmeier, or I believe, Sam, Frank-Walter Steinmeier, would then confirm a date for the election. I know you're the German speaker here, so I wanted to get into that. Okay, so there's a snap election coming on February 23rd. First, I'll get your thoughts on that, and then I'll roll into this social media and sports story.
Okay, well,
snap election, big deal? Not a big deal?
It's a big deal. We touched on this last week when it was the coalition first came unglued. And this occurred apparently because of a falling out between Chancellor Scholz and the leader of his coalition partner, the Free Democrat Party, Christian Lindner, who had been the finance minister in the coalition government, which also includes the Green Party, as mentioned before. And Scholz is considered to be a very reserved person, even by the standards of the German chancellery, right? Which, so that's saying something, right? He's not especially outgoing or not at all ostentatious. And the announcement of the end of or the ousting of the Free Democrats from the coalition consisted of Scholz launching bitter recriminations against Christian Lindner, right? Using words like betrayal. I mean, this was so out of character for Scholz that people just found it really remarkable. But apparently,
that's juicy, man.
Yeah, this had a lot to do with the budget,
Yeah.
uh, but partly because Schultz really wanted to continue helping Ukraine, right? And that cost quite a lot of money. Whereas Christian Lindner, as the head of the Free Democrats, just doesn't like spending money, right? For anything, right? That's kind of what the FDP is about. And so,
Are they fiscally conservative? Kind of as
yes,
that's their deal.
the Free Democrats, I would say, are most analogous to the Liberal Democrat Party in the UK, right? They're socially liberal, right? That is, they're all in favor of things like gay marriage and
National
abortion,
Health Service, whatever. Yeah.
right? But they're
Unions.
fiscally conservative, right?
Not unions, I should say, but they're fiscally conservative.
Yeah, they're very pro-business
Right.
and things like this. And so it was always kind of an odd fit, frankly, amongst the three parties. You had the Greens, and then you had the Free Democrats, and you had the Social Democrats. So the FDP, we would say, would be the most right-leaning party of the three, right? Just not as right-leaning as the current opposition parties, the Christian Democrats in their sibling relationship with the Bavarian Christian Social Union. And so, again, this was very dramatic. And so
Wagnerian. Just kidding.
yeah, well, no.
Yeah.
But we're going to have an election in February. I know, John, that you're probably just as disappointed as I am that this won't be part of Electorama 2024, right? It'll be in 2025.
I'd say it's spiritually part of it, a bit like the long 19th century, we might say.
Sure, yeah, it was announced in 2024, so
yeah.
we might fold it in or
certainly downstream of 2024's politics.
Yeah, sort of yeah, certainly, right? An overtime contest, perhaps, right? But so in a way, this did tie into the election of Donald Trump here in the United States because many people imagine that the United States will curtail aid to Ukraine.
Which means Germany might feel like they have to spend more, and thus the schism.
Right. Exactly. And so this is one of the problems facing Germany today. But the reason in the particular case of Germany that this is a problem is because the Germans have in their constitution, although I should say only since 2009, but they have what's called the debt brake, right, which forbids them by law from running deficits in their budget beyond a certain percentage of GDP, except in what are called emergency circumstances, right? And so I think Lindner of the FDP was thinking, okay, this isn't an emergency, right? We're having an economic problem here in our country. We've got a recession, things like that, but it's not like the fiscal crisis or COVID-19 or something like this. This is just sort of a run-of-the-mill economic downturn. And so
what about if Russia wins? Is that not an emergency for Germany?
Apparently not to Lindner, right? That's, so I think that's part of the problem here, right? Is that the FDP is so concerned with economic issues that they don't really, or not, I wouldn't say they don't care about Ukraine. It's just that they're
not a priority.
And so this relates in some ways to the budgetary crisis happening next door in France, right? Where the new government of Michel Barnier, right? As
I've got some reporting on this to interrupt.
Please go ahead.
Okay. This is from Le Monde. French MPs Tuesday of this week, November 12th, rejected a draft government budget that had been massively amended with new taxes by the left-wing opposition, as the heavily indebted country, that is France, is under pressure to balance the books. With the cobbled together revenue bills tax increases failing to pass the Assemblée Nationale, Prime Minister Michel Barnier, his minority government, now has a largely free hand in submitting a cleaned up text to the Senate before the two chambers come together to seek a compromise.
Yes. And so we'll have to see how this goes. But of course, France and Germany are the two most important countries in the European Union and always have been, even throughout all their rounds of expansion. They're very large economies, and especially since Great Britain left, they really, if nothing's going to happen in the European Union unless France and Germany agree. Now, that's not all it takes, but that's the starting point that you always have to have.
Those are the
Uh,
two biggest economies in the EU.
yes, they are. And uh, so this could be a problem if both France and Germany are having budgetary issues. It could, to some extent, paralyze the European Union, and that's not something that they want to see happen. Uh, this traces back to the early part of this century when both France and Germany were running budget deficits that were larger than were allowed under what's known as the European Stability and Growth Pact, because you don't want any nation in the European Union to run large deficits and boost their own economy at the expense of the other members. Uh, and it worked out, sadly, that the two biggest economies in the EU were the worst offenders. They were running larger deficits than the Stability and Growth Pact allowed them to do. And that's one of the reasons, actually, why the debt brake was moved into the German constitution, right, is to address the problems that they were having and the criticism that they were drawing from other EU members. Right, say, well, like, you have this Stability and Growth Pact, but you're the ones violating, right? It was unfortunate that the Germans put the debt brake into their constitution right after the global financial crisis, right?
I mean,
And
couldn't they and didn't they just say, well, this is an emergency, so it doesn't
they did,
count?
I think, suspend the debt
Yeah.
brake here and there afterwards. But if they put it in
Yeah.
right then,
What timing?
well, sort of at this was, I just think, a mistaken response. For example, the UK government at the time decided that the best response to the financial crisis was an austerity budget, right? And that did not go well for them either. Now, I can understand. I mean, it was a well reasoned idea, but it ended up not being a very good one, in my opinion. And so these sorts of issues have played out ever since. And of course, the COVID-19 pandemic just sort of blew a lot of this stuff up. And so there's some question as to what is the debt brake really for, right? Or, and so
Is it just conveniently ignored when,
right.
right?
And so we're going to have to see how all this plays out in the future. It's going to be very difficult, right? If both France and Germany are facing economic difficulties, that does not bode well for the EU as a whole. And
No,
it,
I think we talked about this earlier. Like the traditional Western allies of the United States post World War II, like Japan, France, Germany, like a lot of political turmoil right now.
yes, and laggard economies in every case,
Yeah.
right? And we talked a few weeks ago about the report delivered to the European Commission by former European Central Bank President and Italian Prime Minister Mario Draghi, who said that, in his opinion, across the European Union as a whole, they need to invest a whole lot more in technological and other kinds of economic competitiveness. But that costs money. And so that sort of puts things like the debt brake in sharp relief. It's not just by wanting to help Ukraine, right, that the Germans might want to consider spending more money than the debt brake would allow, right? It's also for things like investing in economic competitiveness, technological upgrades and things like this, that they're lagging behind the rest of the world in those respects.
You got to spend money to make money.
Yeah, and they really have been. The Germans, especially as the industrial powerhouse of the European Union, seem to have assumed that the kind of economic model of the world would just kind of remain the same, despite ample evidence that it was not going to. Right? China was very obviously investing a lot in technological development, and the Germans weren't. And China is now reaping the rewards of those investments to the expense of Germany. I would say probably more than any other country, simply because they're such a large economy and have the most to lose.
But I mean, Germany also got dealt a bad hand when Russia became a pariah.
Sure, but they didn't. They could have,
like, that's their biggest trading partner.
Yes, but they could have invested more in things like clean energy.
Okay, so you're saying they could have diversified who they're doing business with
The
before,
reason they
right?
were that they were, Russia was their largest trading partner was because that was where they were getting all their natural gas, right?
Right.
I mean, and so if they had become less dependent on Russia by having different sorts of energy sources, then that wouldn't have been as big a problem. But they just said, well, we'll just keep getting gas from Russia. We'll keep on exporting our high tech goods to China, and everything will just stay the same. But China doesn't need those goods as much anymore. They still
Right.
need, right? But they've got their own high tech sectors that are doing rather well now. And so the extent to which they need to import high tech goods from Germany is much less than it used to be.
If you're Xi Jinping or Vladimir Putin, this has played out perfectly.
Yes.
Right. The West is politically cannibalizing itself and destabilizing itself, or at least infighting, right? And pick your Western power. They're either having government I mean, the French political crisis of 2024 has its own Wikipedia entry, right? Just I mean, you got Germany's been in a 2-year recession and they're having a snap election. We talked about Japan in previous episodes. Obviously, the United States has just made a dramatic political lurch. Uh, they're just kind of kicking back and watching the West kind of do a number on itself, right?
Well, to some extent, but
I mean,
as
am I oversimplifying it? I
a little
suppose.
bit, because as we've discussed, I mean, China's having its own economic difficulties that are very
Hey,
serious.
they're setting sail into a golden era with Peru. I think their
That's why I
economic,
forgot about that.
yeah. Hey, Peru is going to fix China's economy. They just built a
And
port and everything.
we talked about last weekend. There was a sort of subcommittee meeting that was supposed to unveil uh, new stimulus measures for the Chinese economy, but that didn't seem to add up to much. However, a lot of people are speculating right now that the reason they haven't really gone full bore is because they think they might have a trade war with the United States under
Oh, I
Donald,
see. Right.
right? And so they're saving the big guns for in case that happens,
Right.
and because they'll really need to do something then, so they
So
might as well hold off.
the Chinese government and the U.S. Fed are kind of in the same spot. They're waiting to see what happens with the new
Well,
Trump
yeah,
economic
not just
policies.
them. I mean, a lot of
Yeah,
people
a lot of
all over
people.
the world are. I think Netanyahu is in Israel, right? Putin certainly is, and so and we're the problem is that Trump won't actually even take office for another 2 months. And so, we'll have to see, what exactly he ends up doing once he's sworn in. And again, that won't be till next year. And so there will be a lot of kind of holding patterns that will, or I guess that's sort of a uh, incorrect term, just because I think, for instance, both Putin and Netanyahu will do everything they can to advance their military positions in their respective conflicts between now and then. And that's something that we're going to need to keep an eye on. And until then, we won't actually know what's going to happen.
All right, can I get to my sports and social
Oh,
media
I'm sorry.
story?
Yeah, please go
Okay,
ahead.
that's all right. That's all right. Okay, so snap election in Germany, February 23rd coming up. CBS News reporting a German soccer club is leaving X, which I still call Twitter, because of the increase in hate speech and disinformation on the social media platform that it claims could undermine the snap elections in the country, Germany. FC, that stands for Football Club, St. Pauli announced the decision yesterday, saying billionaire owner Elon, aka Leon Musk, has turned the platform into, quote, a hate machine since he took over the company in 2022. The club said, quote, racism and conspiracy theories are allowed to spread unchecked and even curated. Insults and threats are seldom sanctioned and are sold as freedom of speech, end of quotation. FC St. Pauli said it had already limited posts on X and increased, quote, political statements in support of diversity and inclusion to make a stand against hate, end of quotation. Now, Sam, it is too late for me. I am hopelessly addicted to Twitter. It is, in fact, really the only social media I use. I do acknowledge it has become much worse under Musk. You, as somebody who never uses it and has sworn it off completely, I thought
Well,
would
then
be
not just
heartened.
one enough. I've never used it.
Yeah, but I thought you'd like that story also in an intersection of Germany, social media, and sport. That's ticking a lot of boxes on working for Crusoe.
Absolutely. And, I mean, I encourage anybody to leave that platform. But I acknowledge it's not going to stop Elon Musk from being the world's richest man, right? He's jumped that requirement, right? He doesn't need Twitter. In fact, he was already the world's richest man before he bought the thing. He's probably losing money on it. He didn't buy it, apparently, I think anyway, uh, in order for it to make money for him. He
No, it's
bought
vanity and influence.
Yeah, exactly. He bought it to control a large part of the dialogue. John, you're a media
And
professional.
apparently it worked.
Yes, that's right. I mean, people keep talking about stuff that's on there, and it's really the most habitual users of the platform, even before he bought it, were just people in the media or people who would like
I
to
know.
be, right? And so
That's
they're
the
the
problem. It is directly wired into the journalism brain. That's why I can't
That's
quit it.
right. And they're the ones who can't stop talking about it, even though three-quarters of the people in the United States have never used it. And
More people listen to the radio than use Twitter. I just like
that's
to point
right.
that out.
And in an actual marketplace of ideas, Twitter would have already failed a long time ago. But the idea that we have a free market in which people compete and the ones that lose die off or vanish, that's not really the way our free market works. That's all, right? Now, I'm not saying that makes it terrible, but it's just not as advertised.
Sam Park, we're going to be back next Friday with another edition of Working for Crusoe. And then in 2 Fridays, we have Thanksgiving and the day following that. So we'll have some decision about how we want to program that. But we don't
That's
need
right.
the listeners
Next
to
week,
peer behind the curtain on that conversation.
Next week, we will at least discuss the COP29
Oh, yes.
climate change summit currently happening
Azerbaijan, the climate
Yeah,
summit in Azerbaijan.
Yes, Baku, the capital of Azerbaijan, a nation in the Caucasus. So that will be especially appealing to all of our Caucasian listeners.
All right. Well, we'll always have Baku next week. Until then, have a great weekend, everybody. He's Sam. I'm John.
As we might say, merci, Baku.